Recording there. All right. Welcome, everyone. I am Shannon Miller with the Miller Elder Law Firm, and I'm here with Sira Botes. And today in this webinar, we are going to talk about dementia and the Botes method, which is a very amazing tool that is being adopted across the United States. And we are so lucky to have Sira here to tell us about the Botes method. And she's actually going to guide us through a couple of ways that dementia affects different processes that we go through as we age. So I'm so glad that you guys are attending. And for those of you that are watching this on later date, welcome. We do welcome questions, and I would love for you guys to know that we will take questions during the webinar. So as a question comes up for you, put it in the question and I'll be watching that. If Sira's talking, I'll, maybe interrupt her and say, hey, there's a really good question on this issue. And we're happy to take those questions during the event. Sira is an occupational therapist by the most recent trade, but I did not know this about her. She's also a certified hand therapist, which, as you guys know, is a very intricate and tricky job to be a hand therapist. And she has also experienced quite a bit of psychiatric training in her background, and I'll let her speak more to that. But welcome, Sira. I wonder if we could start off with you kind of giving us your personal history of what brought you to where you are now. And as a part two to that, and I hate to do part two questions, but what do you do? Like, what is your job right now? Like, what is it that you're doing? Because we would love to get more information on that.
That's a great question. Thank you for having me. As I said, it's a great privilege and honor to be here. And I so admire what Shannon does on the elder law and serving seniors in our community. And just thank you, Shannon, just for your passion and your vision and the way you're doing things differently. And just to alleviate all of that stress that our seniors may face, because it's so difficult to navigate the journey of aging and challenges. So that's just so inspiring to be part of what you're doing. So thank you for having me. So I'm an occupational therapist, and in a nutshell, the job of occupational therapist is to make sure that you can live your best life. So whether you are Shannon and you want to do yoga and you may have pain somewhere, or your joints are just not moving the way you want to, I may come in and do some manual therapy, give you exercises, maybe create a different approach for you so that you can still do your yoga. You may be a baby or a child that have developmental challenges or behavioral challenges. You may be a factory worker that cannot navigate equipment or has become injured from repetitive motion. So occupational therapist will go in and reconstruct the environment. So if we cannot fix the person, we will come up with strategies so that that person can navigate objects, their environment, and other people. So that's what our UTI does in a nutshell. So with that being said, I started my career in the military in South Africa. I had an esteemed scholarship, and they paid for my studies. And as such, I was able to spend my first 2 years in the largest military hospital in the Southern Hemisphere in South Africa. And I spent half my day with the inpatient psychiatric population. And then half my day was split between different departments in the hospital: neurology, premature babies, and hand therapy, acute traumas, that the hospitalized traumas, and spinal cord injuries. But 50% of my week was spent in inpatient psychiatry. And so I had an opportunity to really work as a cohesive team, but getting to understand behavioral patterns and how mental disability affect our population. And that was something really close to my heart. Fast forward, me and my husband moved to the United States in 1996. And I quickly found that mental health is not as supported or funded, and there was not a lot of jobs in mental health. And an opportunity that I had was to pursue hand therapy, and very intricate, as Shannon alluded to, very outcome driven, very focused on small pieces of your body. And I did that for many years and was a wonderful pathway for me. But as a mom of two young children, I quickly found out that I couldn't keep up the pace in outpatient setting. And I was recruited as a director in home therapy, in home setting, so in-home therapy services, in-home home health, where our seniors have access to nursing, PT, OT, speech. And I immediately said, what a hidden gem. What a wonderful opportunity to work with our seniors where they age and deliver services that impact them where they're at in the long run. But I also quickly was faced with the challenge that dementia is in the room. I was just telling Shannon earlier, the white elephant in the room. And at the time, about 12 years ago, we were not really talking about dementia in healthcare. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the opinions out there was, oh, wow, this person has dementia. They don't have a rehabilitative, there's no outcomes that we can foresee. Therefore, we are going to limit our services. And this really created some anger in me. As a therapist, I believe that everybody has the opportunity to have a meaningful life, to be joyfully engaged, to age in place. And I just couldn't accept this attitude of this person does not qualify for services. And for
Okay,
me,
I gotta
yeah,
jump in on this one,
yes,
Sira, because you know, you and I have the same, you know, perspective on this. It's like, you know, what we've been talking about with Dr. Oken. If you have a Parkinson's diagnosis, it doesn't mean that you can't live a full life. It may mean that you change a few things in your life. Just like if you have a dementia diagnosis or a loved one has that dementia diagnosis, it may not mean that there's like this warehousing that we are often seeing with people who, you know, become ill with chronic illness. It's like this, like, it's almost like we want them to disappear from our society because they're struggling with a particular disability. But what you're doing, and I think across the board, what we're starting to see is that yes, there does need to be certain shifts made, but like you're going to show us today, there are different stages that we can participate in a very active and contented life. And so
amen.
I love that you're talking about that, because honestly, this idea of like treating the disease has way outlived its, you know, value.
Usefulness. Yep.
Yeah. And in fact, what we need to be doing is treating the patient and
Amen.
making sure that our person has the fullest life possible, but also the caregivers and everyone else who's, you know, kind of supporting that person. We also have to recognize that caregiver fatigue and all those pieces that are happening when someone has a chronic health issue, you know, that we're starting to fix a little more attention on getting people to have great lives, as opposed to how do we, you know, give them Aricept for, you know, 6 months to see if that's going to delay the progression. You know, I mean, there's so many other strategies for helping people live healthy lives. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I
I
love
love
that
that.
you're talking about that. And I
I
just want
love
to
your
highlight,
passion.
yes.
No, absolutely. And it takes like-minded people like us and others in our network and our healthcare network to recognize that what we've done so far has not worked. Like you said, what we've done is focusing on a diagnosis instead of person-centered, instead of environment-centered, instead of that supportive village. But what I ran into was, first off, we have a generation, and as generations, we've become so dependent on that diagnosis. We are almost paralyzed to a point of we cannot make decisions unless we have a diagnosis, and still we have a sticker. And then we've been made accustomed that that can be solved by a drive to the pharmacy. And we'll just quickly go to the pharmacy and our problems are solved. And unfortunately, that's not true, especially not for dementia. And I think when, as a healthcare system, when we failed to provide, first of all, we don't believe in our own healthcare strategies because we know that medicine is not going to work. So there is a diagnosis, and there's no bridge from the diagnosis to a meaningful life for our patient or our person. And this is where I saw that chasm, and I wanted to have a bridge for our caregivers, for our persons, because healthcare did a very poor job at stopping at that diagnosis and not providing hope, not providing relief, not providing resources. And we couldn't do it because we did not understand, or we didn't seek to understand, the intricate impact of cognitive decline on somebody's wellness, on their life. And a diagnosis is actually just a way for us as a healthcare provider to document and to bill insurance. A diagnosis does not constitute wellness. It takes education. It takes us to equip people with dementia sensitivity, dementia IQ, make a safe space for everybody involved so that we're able to implement the resources and solutions. And the only way to do that is if we're willing to stop and to understand the challenges of our person. And so that's no different for a person living with dementia. And so what I found that there was just no good strategies to decipher, to demystify the brain so we can understand the journey. Unfortunately, as healthcare providers, the message we've given is that this is dementia. We push you into a dark room and we're like, go deal with it. And then come back in 6 months and we'll see where you're at. And then we'll just kind of, check our boxes. Versus, let's demystify this. And this is where dementia stages come in, is allowing us to understand that there are strengths that our persons still have. Yes, they may have challenges, there may be barriers, but if we can tease that out and understand on which path on this journey our person is on, we can come alongside them, we can lock arms, we can educate on how to set up the environment, how do we speak to that person, how do we incorporate them, and then how do we make them feel valued, respected? How can we highlight their strengths so that everybody involved are empowered? And so that's where the Botes analysis was born from, is establishing a new approach, occupational therapy approach, to analyze brain processes as it pertains to engaging and being safe and being independent.
Going to jump in again because this is something that our clients struggle with so much. And it's this caregiver frustration with our dementia diagnosed loved one. They want the person to remember. They just told them, they don't own their house anymore. We can't go home because you don't own the house anymore. And it creates this like anxiety with not just our caregiver, it's usually a child or a spouse who's getting more and more frustrated that our person doesn't remember their nephew's name. And then our little person gets so anxious and they kind of start to withdraw and they're like depressed, and your little heart is my little heart is always breaking when I watch these interactions, because I know how it's heartbreaking for everyone, because this idea of like going with a lie, like a therapeutic lie is what we call it. Our ECCs have taught me this, like it's okay if she thinks she's going home eventually. even though we sold the house 7 years ago. This, like it's something that we're trained, like, don't ever lie. Like you can, and sometimes there's these agreements, Sira, that where, our loved one, it's a couple and they've promised each other that they will never lie to each other and that they will never put each other in, a long-term care bed, and like all these things that are historically so important to them as human beings. And now that we have this, dementia coming in, it's often so stressful and there's so much anxiety there in the relationships as they're communicating, that it's often a challenge for us coming in because it's already built up to this super high anxiety level. But what we really need to be doing is educating everybody on, like, okay, where are we in the stages and how do we communicate effectively and how
Amen.
do we reduce that anxiety for everyone? Like, it's okay. It's okay.
It's
So help
okay.
us. Help us.
Yes, yes. And I think for me, it was the same. I knew inertly that as a therapist, I come to, I come to this game with a personal history of my grandfather living with Alzheimer's disease, Korsakoff's disease, so alcohol-induced, triggering the Alzheimer's process, and watching my grandmother as a young teenager out in the country with no support. I mean, he was a difficult man, and watching her dealing with him in ways that was positive and joyful and meaningful. And that left a mark on me. And then fast forward, my mom has lived and walked this journey with dementia for roughly going on 20 years. And in the past 5 years of her life, she has almost no short-term memory. I think, your statements were so loaded. So, in order for us to connect with a dementia, a person living with dementia, first of all, we need to understand that all of us remain human. And in our Boat's memory method, mantra is dementia may steal your mind, but it's not going to steal your heart. So the heart of that person is still there, although they're having a hard time to grasp certain memories, especially if it's painful memories. And that's an interesting thing, is how do we make memories? And I get the statements from people that says, my mom does not remember what she had for breakfast, but she remembers the yellow Mustang that she saw on the interstate last week. And I call those the power of emotions. And so when we educate and walk this journey with our loved ones and with our families, it's important to understand how the brain is being deconstructed during this disease process. And with the flower levels, the lily being beginning neurocognitive decline, the daisy being mild neurocognitive decline, and you'll see we don't talk about dementia. Dementia is just the umbrella term because we don't really know what's happening. It may be triggered by a genetic disorder, it may be long-term inflammation, it may be chronic cortisol in the cells, it may be chemical overloads. The baseline is dementia is a group of brain diseases, including Alzheimer's, including Parkinson's, including Lewy bodies, including frontotemporal. It's a lot of different terminologies. And all we're trying to say to you is the brain is declining. The brain cells are dying faster than they are regenerating. And so now we call it dementia. And so that has been quite an obstacle for us as healthcare providers. So what we're doing with this staging, the Boat's memory method staging, is we are not worried about the actual diagnoses. We are worried about where are your person right here, right now, with a neurocognitive ability. And so then when we analyze the person and we arrive at a lily with beginning neurocognitive decline, a daisy, mild neurocognitive decline, your violet, the purple flower is moderate, your rose is severe, and then grouped together, the bouquet level is the advanced stages. When we create these stages, we are opening the curtains for you in a dark room. We are allowing you to have a baseline understanding of where your person is at in their journey. And that's going to impact how you set up the environment, how you make decisions, how you talk to that person, and it helps you have expectations of how this person may struggle with making memories. Now, here's the good news. Even though I may struggle with short-term processing and laying down short-term information for use right now, many of our flower levels, lily through the violet, can make long-term memories if the information is valuable enough to them, if it's repeated enough, if it's structured in a way that they can process it. So I may never store their short-term memories, but I may create the opportunity for them to connect with memories so that it has a long-term impact. So this is why it becomes important to understand where is your person on that stages. And there was something else you said. Oh, this is what I wanted to point out. As we lose access to the different rooms in our brain, so to your frontal lobe, your temporal lobe, your occipital lobe, your parietal lobe, as you are less able to connect the dots in your brain spaces, your lily has higher functioning, so they're still pretty able to connect all the rooms in their brain to make sense of what's happening. The same for the daisy, except the daisy is really losing short-term memory ability, so they have a hard time to be consistently on top of what's happening. They need more structure and routine. But by the time we get to a violet and a rose and a bouquet level, at that point, our brain is really very disconnected, disconfabulated, if you would. But there's one superpower for all of us, and that's our amygdala, our emotional brain. And something you were saying before, for all of us, when we're in an anxiety-inducing situation or an unknown situation that we don't have the coping skills for, that's what our amygdala does. It's fight or flight. It gets triggered so that we can survive. And that's not just true for a person living with dementia, because that's the only choice they have. When they're a violet, a rose, or a bouquet, if you look at scans, the amygdala is fired up and the amygdala is ready to go to war. Either go to war so I can survive, or I can have joy and pleasure because they live in the same space. So that's the superpower. But if I, as a caregiver, if I'm not provided with resources and options and hope and a network of dementia care, guess what? I'm also living through my fight and flight response to survive because I don't have the coping skills to enter into that environment. I'm fighting for my own survival. So how am I supposed to model success for my person living with dementia? And so that's where, with this language, this memory bouquet language, can we educate, equip, empower everybody involved, exactly what you said, so we can take it down a notch, so that we can calm our amygdala, our response, because suddenly we are not in a fight or flight situation with this diagnosis.
And this, okay, so this, and I'm just asking this because I think it's very similar to this idea of like your sympathetic brain versus your
Yes.
parasympathetic brain.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So,
So
so when
that
you're
will trigger your
right,
sympathetic responses versus your parasympathetic responses. And it all happens because of our emotions or our traumas. And if we're holding on to those emotions or traumas, we're continuing to trigger our nervous system into heightened awareness.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and you know, it's like there's so many strategies out there now with just mindfulness training like meditation and yoga and cold plunging and breath work, and like all our strategies are intended to get us from sympathetic brain into
Yes.
parasympathetic.
But
So
where
this
does
is
that
like,
come from, right? How do we establish? It's because you have knowledge of yoga, meditation, cold plunges. You've seeked the knowledge because you recognize that your stress has placed you into a constant parasympathetic response, and you have seeked an avenue to help you deal with that. And so that's what I created for our persons living with dementia, is a literally an avenue which helps you bring your parasympathetic state down, calm down, help you to take on control, help empower you. And for me, it comes through hope and through compassion. And instead of just a diagnosis, let's enter into this bubble that you're living in, and let's together find out what is the strengths and the hope that you have in this situation, because it's different for everyone. And so also through our quality of life tool, we developed a quality of life tool that we implement for both the caregiver and the person living with dementia. And a lot of time there's disparity between the perceived quality of life of our person living with dementia and the perceived quality of life of our caregiver. And as a dementia consultant, we can help you understand how to match that back up. Especially, you talked about, the lies that we have to tell. And I want to reframe that into, how do we understand my person living with dementia's reality? Because their reality is not a lie. Their reality is truth. And their reality is affected by the lack of memory, by the lack of connection, by the lack of processing current events. But when we are meeting our person where they're at, we are not telling a lie, we are meeting them in their truth. And so if Shannon is suppose Shannon came on today and Shannon told me, Sira, maybe she's crying, and I'm saying, Shannon, what's wrong? And Shannon tells me, my dog just died. I'm going to say, Shannon, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to fact check her. I'm not going to call her husband and say, hey, Shannon is sitting here dying, crying because her dog just died. Can you tell me what dog, the size, how big, how long she had him? It doesn't matter. For my relational connection with Shannon, and for me to establish rapport and safety and connection and compassion, for you to feel like you can trust me, I need to meet you where you're at in your reality for what that is right now, regardless if your dog died 15 years ago.
I love that. I want to come back to how you layer that with this quality of life. I like to call it our person's currency. Like, what do
Yes.
they love, right? Do they love walking their dog? Do they love to get outside? Do they love to hear the piano being played? Like, what is their currency that keeps them? I mean, the stories of, and you've probably seen I've seen clients who can no longer remember how to really talk and converse. But when that music comes that they love and it's their favorite
Yes.
song, and they're singing every word,
And
and
it's the amygdala. It's a neuro pathway to our deepest. And that's why I'm saying it, the brain is such a wonderful mystery that can be unlocked if we understand the power of the amygdala. And in the amygdala is our music, our sense of rhythm. You can go to the most primitive tribe that's making their own instruments, but music is an integral part of what we do instinctively as a human being. We're wired for rhythm. Our movement depends on the beat of music. Our movement depends on our ability to respond and to plan our movement in milliseconds. And so I have had persons that I worked with that was a two-person transfer, nonverbal, and we put Mickey Blue Eyes. I think of him as Mickey Blue Eyes, and then I forget his name.
Sinatra?
Yes, thank you. And
Yeah.
so then I put the music on, and this was in the middle of a training. So this was a very spontaneous experiment. And I put Frank Sinatra on. She looked up at me. She locked eyes with me. I put my hand out with a smile. She put her hand on my hand. She got up out of a deep couch without any assistance. She twirled from someone that was shuffling and that could not walk, and she was functioning at the rose level, so she needed hand over hand assist, face to face communication, demonstration of what's needed from her. But with the music we stimulated the neural pathway that she remembered, and her muscles remembered. And then after our little encounter she said, "Thank you, that was nice." A non-verbal person. And
Wow.
for caregivers to see that and to experience how we can reestablish that, we call it a meaningful connection. And that meaningful connection can lead to meaningful engagement, that can lead to a meaningful day. And if we understand how our person can receive sensory stimulation, and that is seated in the amygdala, it's a sense of smell, a sense of touch, sense of taste. So we still have salty and sweet taste towards the end of life. And then that sense of hearing, the move of music, voices, reading. And how can we use this superpower, this amygdala, to our advantage during interaction, and building rapport with someone, calming them down, bringing them to a point where we can start with a meaningful connection that can lead to meaningful engagement and a meaningful day. And so, yes, the brain is a beautiful thing.
And I love that. And it kind of overlaps, Sira, with, what we know from the science. How do we get those neural pathways to kind of continue to open or engaging in them? And I will share with the group, and you already know this, but the brain, they did some brain research at the University of Florida, and they found the top 5 things that actually can affect the progression of dementia. And I'll just run through them really quick so you
Yes.
guys know. It's like good nutrition, so Mediterranean diet. And now I'm going to layer into, when I talk about this, using, sensory perception, sweetness and salty at the end of life. That those are really cool ways to stimulate, right? And then we have good sleep. So if you have apnea, you need to get that, sleep
Taken
machine
care of.
going.
Yep.
Yep. And even what I've learned, and I actually learned this from another occupational therapist, even if you take a nap during the day, you're getting that solid, 6 hours at night, and then you get a 2-hour nap in the day, and then maybe another hour nap sometime early in the morning. Like, even that is better than the,
Being
5
sleep
hours.
deprived. Yeah.
Right.
And then
Because you have to get up and go to
exercise.
bed.
That's one of
Yeah.
your pillars too.
Full,
Exercise. Yeah.
right. Full body exercise, which means,
Yes.
again, with the neural pathways, moving your finger, and like, it's not just walking. It needs to be the full body. That's why we love Tai Chi and Qigong and those types of movements. Calendaring is the other one, where we keep
Mhm.
track of what we do during our activities during the day. Brain games. And those
Yes.
5, you'll notice, no medication is not on the list.
And
So,
socialization. I love that one too. Like
yes.
meaningful relationships. If you start feeling institutionalized, you don't no longer have choices. You have to be socially engaged, feeling like you're contributing, like that you're valued, that you have a purpose, and that comes through a meaningful social relationship. And so, yeah, I
And let me
preach
just
it.
interrupt you, Sira, on that one, because they did not study that. They studied these 5,
The other
actually,
ones,
the
there is some
medication too.
studies. Yeah, there
Are
is some,
there?
there
Okay.
are some studies.
Okay.
So the
All
Cleveland
right.
Institute, has done some studies, and there's a big one right now, not to divert, because those are some
No,
very important
sure.
information, but the World Health Organization, as well as the Surgeon General in 2023, stated that isolation and loneliness is the next pandemic. And so that's and going to start to cause more deaths. So if isolation and loneliness in our normal population is becoming a pandemic because we are not engaged socially in ways that feeds our souls and feeds our brains, then that is so much more prevalent in our seniors, our aging seniors, and our persons living with dementia who is unable to initiate the right kind of social interaction that are no longer appropriate or difficult or challenging. So now, instead of someone taking the time to make a connection that stimulates those neurotransmitters, they are being left to their own devices. They're being left in their room, or
Yeah.
they're, you know,
Television, left in front of the
television.
television.
Yes. And so, social, and we also saw through COVID, when we isolated our persons with dementia in their rooms, the death rate was higher due to isolation than due to um, due to COVID. So yeah, I think as
Yeah.
far as
Sierra,
studying, yeah, go ahead.
let me jump in because I got to tell a story on that one. My
Yes,
grandmother, 102, during the pandemic. Well, before the pandemic, my dad would bring her cheese, crackers, and wine every day. And she looked forward to that. She was actually at the plaza for the last 2 years of her life. And, she had progressive dementia, but man, she loved that wine and cheese. When I would go in to see her, she would say,
routine, repetition, the same
right?
place, the same people. Oh,
And
yes.
I would ask her the same question, like, Grandma, what did you have for breakfast today? And she would look at me and she'd be like, I don't know. And we would laugh, and it was so funny. And she loved her black wine. She called her red wine black. But during the pandemic, when that stopped, and we would like go and look at her through the window,
Mm.
and she couldn't really see us. And it literally broke her heart to the point where she died. So I know firsthand that isolation, that socialization literally kept her having joy in her life. She looked
Amen.
forward to it every day. I'm not saying that she had the best quality of life, because she had trouble and, all these things that happen as we age. But man, that isolation and inability to have that social contact in particular with what's familiar, like your family, it really does have a huge impact, especially on that dementia.
It does. I think we do lack what your point was. We do lack the evidence because it's very hard to study that. And because there's
Yes.
so many variables on our brain health. So how are you going to just study isolation? But I
Yeah.
think anecdotally, if we look at institutions, we look at COVID, we just look at the impact of isolation. I think anecdotally we can deduct that socialization is like a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
There has to be socialization, meaningful relationships daily for every one of us. And with that is touch and touch deprivation. And so socialization and touch, whether it's just holding a hand, holding an arm. And when I train caregivers and therapists, I talk a lot about safe touch and therapeutic touch. And what does that look like? Because a lot of our persons, and we probably have to stop for questions, but a lot of our persons become combative for certain things because of the way in which we deliver it. So that sensory, they remember, again, the emotional amygdala stores the sensory experience that person have from the way in which we touch them and enter into their space. And if it's not perceived as safe and engaging, that can trigger ongoing behavioral responses. And just on a last note, I always say that all of us have difficult behaviors. All of us have behavioral challenges. Think of yourself if your coffee percolator didn't percolate correctly that morning, or the traffic is bad, or your teenager is acting up. We have behaviors. Why do we expect anything different for a person living with dementia? And a big part of that is because we're unable to meet their internal needs. They have needs just like us that needs to be met. And it's our job to understand where are they at on this journey so that we can adjust and meet their needs.
And on that, I can tell you just in our life care planning model, we've had situations come up like we had recently. One of our clients who has a Lewy body dementia diagnosis. One facility won't admit anyone with a Lewy body diagnosis to their memory
What do
care.
you think whose problem is that? It's the providers who is not trained and doesn't. I get so fired up about this. If we're not, as a home care agency or as a OT, if I'm not accepting a patient, it's because I do not have the strategies and the training to deal with that patient well. That's not the patient's problem. That's my problem. So as healthcare providers, as institutions, hospitals, SNFs, rehabs, we have to do better. This problem is getting worse. The numbers is getting worse. We should not be allowed to say, I'm not taking Lewy body's dementia. I mean, are we allowed to say you have cancer, I'm not going to treat you, or I'm not going to accept you? We're not allowed to say that. How are we allowed to discriminate? So I call it dementia discrimination, or if withholding treatment and withholding opportunities to a better life because we are not equipped to deal with it. That should be a criminal. And I just feel very strongly about that. I'm so
Well,
sorry if
let
I'm
me,
offending
no,
anyone.
I love that. I love that. Cause like we are like Betty, like, we're like, what are you talking about? You're a memory care unit. Like you
Right.
can't, but we could get all day in that. But the other thing that happens often, Sarah, and I'm sure this is going to fire you up. We've had many of our dementia clients who are in a memory care unit be Baker acted.
Oh,
Be
let's
Baker
not even get
acted.
started about that one.
I know. And like, I'm like, oh my gosh, you've just taken someone out of all of their,
Their
sense of
safety, their
security,
routine,
the
their
routine. Yes,
environment.
yes, yes. And now you put them in a facility with no structure or structure that is completely alien to them. And no wonder they're decompensating when we put them there. So, I mean, again, there's a problem that this is happening. And I mean, how do we deal with that, Sira? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, first of all, advocacy, which you're doing amazingly well. We need to understand how to advocate. A dementia patient should never be Baker acted. Here in Alachua County, we have now strategies. We have the DCCI, Dementia Cure and Care Initiative. I've worked closely with the Fixel Institute. Actually, they memory care clinic, they manage the grant for the DCCI. And I worked with the chair, and we delivered education to the Alachua County and the Gainesville sheriffs and police and EMTs.
Lovely.
And I know the Alzheimer's Association has an initiative too, but right now, a dementia patient should never be Baker acted, number one. And then a lot of it is going back to, I'm leadership. As leaders, whoever we are, we need to take ownership of this dementia problem, and we need to stop being lazy in our attitude. And because the path of least resistance is just to say, do what we always did, because then it's no longer my problem. Then it's not my facilities problem. It's not my staff's problem. Or in the case of that rehab community, I don't have to deal with that problem. So now I don't have to be accountable for training, for stepping up a notch, and for delivering good care. So I think a part of this is empowering our persons, our families, our communities, empowering them with knowledge on what does it look like when things go right. And then how do we keep each other accountable as a community? I don't know all of it. I learned so much from you yesterday on the legal aspects, and there's so much I can learn, because together, if we advocate together in unity with the same voice, then we can start changing these unhealthy patterns that has become just that, a pattern, because it's the path of least resistance, and there's no accountability in healthcare unless we keep ourselves accountable, or unless our patients, our persons that we serve, keep us accountable for the best service. And because you have dementia does not mean that you're not equal to anybody else in receiving the best services that's out there. You are
Yeah.
just as valuable than anybody else. I don't care where you're on the spectrum. You should have access to exactly the same type of meal than anybody else. You have to have access to the same type of tea. I can go on and on. But
I love it. I mean, and that, it's this idea that somehow we're less than human if we have this diagnosis. I mean,
right.
and I mean, I could go on and on about this topic, but we are running out of time. And I want to just call out the Fixel Institute because they are doing this patient-centered approach to managing Parkinson's disease and any brain and deal that they're able to use some of the newest strategies like deep brain stimulation, but they also have this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach where they're bringing a team in to try and figure out how can we make this person's life amazing. Just shift it a little bit. Like one of the things I love that Dr. Oken always talks about is, have a little extra weight. Like have a little extra weight if you have a Parkinson's diagnosis. Like that's not the normal strategy.
Yeah,
And he
that
also
right,
talks
right.
about, yeah, have a little extra weight as you're aging
Yeah.
because, you might need it if you get sick, if you get pneumonia, and if you get, so like, it's just these little tips about living a better life that we need to start incorporating into just educating, not just educating our people that are going through the aging process, but also their families and the community at large. Because it sounds like the healthcare community needs a lot of this type of education in order to do a better job of doing what we're asking them to do, which is to take care of the person, not just the disease.
Amen. So the DCCI is the Dementia Cure and Care Initiative, and it's a grant through the Department of Aging. And there's 4 chapters, I think, in the state of Florida. So I serve on their council. It's actually open to the public. If anybody wants to come in, we have monthly. So in September, there will be a speaker actually on shelters, special needs shelters. And can you think, I never thought, you should think, I should have thought about dementia as a special need in a shelter. But this person is going to talk about that and how we need to accommodate our dementia persons differently in a special needs shelter. That's such a important topic. So if anybody wants any more information, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat box if I can. How do I do that? Oh, type answer. I can type answer. Yeah. So it's my email is Sira Botes at Botes, Botes, memorymethod.com. You can also, we have opportunity that I'd love to share. We are doing an initiative with UF capstone doctorate students. And we have an open enrollment right now. So you go to my website, Botes Memory Method, BOTES.com. You'll see there's a little UF sticker, UFOT, and it will say sign up here. And if you're a caregiver that's seeking an individualized quality of life assessment and want access to 6 free virtual support sessions, then please sign up. We have open enrollment through August 31st. And we would love to have you part of our little study.
And Sira, I know there's a lot of people that are, professionals that work in, guardianship or probate, or, they're dealing with people with issues in the special needs world. You have a certification through the Botes method, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so we do. I'm working. You're jumping the gun here, Shannon. You're putting me on the spot. No, okay. So let me clarify that. So I just started as a private consultant June 1st of 2024, and I serve concierge home care as through their OT services, their clinical services. They use Botes Memory Method, and it's 100% paid under Medicare. As a dementia consultant, I have started developing pathways and packages for specific to hospitals, to maybe law firms, strategies and pathways that's unique to you that you can implement for your service line, whatever that may be. So yes, just email me. Again, Sira Botes, Sira. Oh, my name is on the screen. So Sira Botes, one word, at botesmemorymethod.com. Email me, and we can talk about what are your specific needs and how can we structure education and create a pathway that's unique to your service delivery, for you to be successful with your dementia population.
I love it. I love it. It's the future. We've got to do better.
Got to do
Well,
better.
thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We're a little long today on the webinar, so I'm sorry about that, but I just couldn't cut this one short. It's too important, and hopefully we get to have you back soon to talk more. I know you had some slides today.
Next time, we can make it
we
all
didn't,
legal.
we didn't get to a single slide, so maybe we have you back next time so we can walk through, you know, a little bit more detail about the Botes method and do some more education. But it sure is great having you, and thank you for coming, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't remember what we have up next, but if you registered for the webinar, you'll get notifications of what we have next coming. And if you have questions about life care planning, estate planning, any of the good elder law issues, please call our office. We're happy to help. And again, thank you so much, Sira, for coming.
Shannon, this was a joy. Thank you for enduring my passion and
Oh,
having a
you're
platform
lovely.
to share all that we have in common, and just creating a community. It's wonderful. Thank you so
Lovely.
much.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.